Hello, Internet students. Welcome to class with Professor Mead. Today we're going to be talking about the article titled The Social Construction of the Immoral Black Mother, Community Policing and the Effects of Youth on Violence. So you may have noticed already that we don't have our traditional think, pair, share here. On this one, I'm asking you about the methods, right? Can you identify the thesis, method, and population? So as a fourth year, 400 level class, fourth year student, this is a skill that you probably have had the opportunity to practice, but we're practicing it more and more every week here. So that's what I want to see if you can do this week. I'm not going to give it to you per se. I'd like you to identify the thesis, look for and identify the thesis, method, and population to show how you've developed that skill. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the 5 main themes, and then I'm going to have you lead the discussion from that analytical perspective. So when talking about the intersections of a social problem, social problems and Black mothering, right? So that is essentially saying that when we look at how Black women are constructed in terms of their mothering ability and how that is connected to the larger social structures, right? The institutionalized difference in access between the haves and the have-nots, right? So it's your access or lack of access to resources in society, right? Those are the social problems that we are connecting with Black mothering. And so in this article, there's essentially 5 themes. The first one says, theme 1 says, the diminished ability to parent due to limited economic and social supports within the context of urban decay. So just starting with urban decay, right? We're looking at the way that the environment, the city, and the community around you is literally in decay. And so you do lack access to all types of resources, not just things like parks and nice buildings and street lights, but also things like grocery stores, medical facilities, those types of things, right? That's urban decay as well. So creating these food deserts, creating a lack of access to healthcare, defunded schools or unfunded school systems, right? All of those things contribute to what we call urban decay. And so what the women who were in this article talk about is that when you try to quote unquote do the right thing for your children, but you're within the context of a community in urban decay, what you do as a mother simply doesn't work in the same way that it would if you didn't have that particular structural issue impacting your family. So can you think about what are some of the social conditions that lead to Black mothers and lead them towards these marginalized positions where they lack authority with their family or access to the economy or access to healthcare, those types of things, right? So I give you a few: economy, infrastructure, education, policing. We know we have over-policing in Black communities in general and communities of color in general. We know we have a lack of funding for education systems, even, facilities like school systems that work, actual books, teachers, those kinds of things are all lacking within communities of color. Infrastructure, you have issues like freeways being built through communities that destroy communities where people previously, would walk from place to place. Now they can't. They don't have vehicles and they don't have access to get around. Basically, the freeways or the infrastructure breaks the community bond, but breaks the ability to create that social capital, and may physically limit people from being able to access things like the bank or the barbershop that they could access before. And of course, access to the economy. If you can't find a living wage job, that is going to impact every other aspect of your life. Theme 2 is the constant fear of losing children to public agencies. So the second issue that we see that is quite prevalent within communities of color is that you have child protective services in mass working in these communities, and most of the time the people who work for child protective services are not people of color, and they have cultural boundary understandings. They have issues of ethnocentrism. If you come from a middle class white background and you're dealing with communities of color, you're not going to see things the same way. And we just don't have enough people who, you know, even just speak the same language as a lot of people who are being policed through child protective services. We also see like just very quick movement into their lives, sometimes even in the hospital as soon as a baby is born. And so one of the comments that was made in the article was, the state is raising our children, and as far as I can see, they're not doing a very good job of it. Meaning that, you know, the state's taking children from their homes and putting them into foster homes or putting them into facilities where it's like larger foster group systems, and children are being raised through these systems, and it's not working well for the children or for the families. And the children are having all types of multiple issues, and also being subjected to other types of abuse that they may not have found in their home. And mothers, especially in communities of color, feel as though they're constantly having to run from probation officers, social workers, child protective service workers. So when you feel like these people are not here to help you, but they are here to take your children from you, and that they're not going to understand your perspective, you're going to see them as a detriment to your ability to mother. And it has actually been for many people, specifically that. So the question that you would want to ask now is, how does policing Black mothers hinder their abilities to parent, right? So we're thinking about these macro level policing through CPS, through probation officers, through actual police officers, right? So these structural issues, the way that the communities of color just have a bombardment, can't even say that right, of policing in their the way that they parent, how does that actually hinder their ability to parent? The next theme, theme 3, is a fear of abuse and injury. So not only is there a combined mistrust of outside agencies, but there is the desire to create that social capital that we learned about, right? Community, loyalty, and then this desire to have agency in family and community. So that is not only a good desire, but that also has been broken often through the structural inequalities, through things that we talked about before, like infrastructure or lack of access to resources like fresh fruits and vegetables at a grocery store. So you have this fear of outsiders, fear of abuse and injury, which does occur, right? And also a desire to create that social capital within the community. So how does this combination of policing combined with violence dramatically impact mothers' lives, right? Young Black men's lives and young Black women's lives. So she talks about in this article, or Richie talks about in the article, that the violence within the community and through policing not only impacts the lives of the young Black men who go through it, but also their sisters, their mothers, their daughters, right? It impacts them as well. So how does it do that? The next theme is theme 4, generalized culturally constructed loyalty to Black young men, right? So what is that rhetoric that they're talking about, that we hear about, that surrounds young Black men? How is that harmful to young Black men? And how is that same rhetoric harmful to young Black women? Theme 5 is the involvement in prevention initiatives and community activism. So juxtapose that history that we learned about earlier between Black women's community involvement with the current experiences of powerlessness and sense of failure and increased risk of harm within their communities, right? Talk about that difference that you can now see because you've seen both perspectives. So now you kind of see what I think I'm going to ask of you, right? And that is that I ask of you, and that's that you're the one that takes the lead, and I'm handing it to you, right? I've kind of shown you how to identify things like the methods and the thesis and the population, and then how to deconstruct an article, and I'm asking you the questions, but it's your job to kind of pull those questions or those answers out of the article and present them back to me in a fluid way, in a way that you would want to hear it, right? If you were the one listening to the lecture. And feel free, by the way, I'm going to be asking you to do an activity where you're creating a PowerPoint. Feel free to mimic the way that I do mine, not this particular one, but in general, right? Where I'm posing your questions, and then I'm giving answers, and then I'm touching back on those same answers and that content. Before we continue on to some of the additional questions from this article, let's talk a little bit about social construction, and we already kind of know the definition of this. So something that's socially constructed is something that we agree that is real and therefore becomes real in its consequences. And we can identify something that's a social construction because it changes over time. It changes from culture to culture. We have a collective ideology about it, so we agree that it's real. It doesn't actually have to be factually real to be real in its consequences. And for this reason, social constructions are both constructed but also real at the same time. And according to the women that were interviewed, that Richie interviewed, how does living in a decaying urban community complicate the way that they mother, right? So thinking about the social construction of Black mothering, right, or this idea of the immoral Black mother, that we've constructed this in society where the mother is to blame, and it's the mother's responsibility as well to raise the kids in a way that society deems appropriate. But when somebody ends up on the wrong side of the law or health or mental health or anything like that, we point to that person and we say, well, what did you individually do wrong? And we learned a lot about this when we talked about the media, right? We talked about how the media uses these, uses like policing, the judicial system and the medical system as like concrete facts, and then points to the abuser and looks at what they did wrong, right? Without ever taking into account the macro level structural issues that impact any type of situation at all, no matter whose situation it is. There are macro level or institutional social structural issues that impact your ability to do anything, that from getting a job to being a parent, right? It can either enhance your ability and because you have access to different types of resources for you and your family, or it can completely hinder it, right? So the structural issue that we're talking about here is the decaying urban community. And the individual action that we're talking about here is mothering, specifically mothering as a woman of color, right? So how does that macro level structural problem, social problem, complicate the micro level mothering agenda? The next question I want to ask is, why do many Black women that were interviewed feel powerless as mothers, right? So what is it about both the macro level structural issues and the micro level structural issues that create this sense of powerlessness for women of color who are attempting to mother. How does the poverty that these mothers experience differ from the poverty that their children face? So also discussed in the article, right? So how does that structural issue of lack of access to the economy, how does that impact the mothers differently than it does the children? That just brings us to our wrap up. It's repeating the questions that were already asked. I guess I will sign off as your reluctant YouTube professor. Have a great day.